Okay, welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can build NLP-powered web applications without writing any code. We're going to use Bubble to build the front end and some publicly available APIs to build the back end. We're going to build an app that can take news articles and apply some NLP processing to them and extract things like sentiment, entities, and automatic summary generation. So I'll show you what that looks like and what we're going to be building towards. So this application allows the user to input a search term, so say COVID-19. And the first thing it'll do is fetch a list of news articles, and then the user can choose an article that they want to analyze. So let's say this one. You click this button, you get the full text of the article, and then we can click Analyze. And this will feed this data to an API, and it'll return the polarity or the sentiment, so positive, negative, neutral, as well as the people mentioned in the article. So these are names of all the people mentioned in that article. So you can see Paige Cortez is probably one of the first people here. And it returns an automatically generated summary of the article. So this is what we'll be building towards. It'll probably look a little bit different when we're done, as with last time, but we'll use the same basic structure. So I'll give you a quick overview of what the tutorial is going to look like, and then we'll get into building it and connecting APIs. So the first thing is just a few words about NLP, or natural language processing, if you're not familiar with this term or this field. We'll look very briefly at the architecture of the application. It's quite simple, quite straightforward. And then we're going to look at finding APIs, how to find APIs that you can use in your Bubble apps, and then how to plug them in using the API connector. And then last, we'll build the application from the ground up, just starting with a blank page. So first, a little bit about NLP. Natural language processing is a field of computer science and linguistics that's concerned with processing text data with computer programs. So it's a subfield of machine learning that's quite popular. It's a really interesting domain that you can do a lot with. There's so much text data available on the web through things like Wikipedia and Reddit APIs and Twitter and archive.org and all sorts of different ways that you can get text data to apply analytics to. So having these techniques in your tool belt is really powerful. So I'm not going to say too much about the theory or the practice. If you're interested, there's tons of resources online to look at, but if you're interested in further discussions, leave a comment below and we can talk. So yeah, that's all I'll say about NLP. The next thing is we'll look at the architecture of the application, which, like I said, is pretty straightforward. We're going to build our front end in Bubble, which is what we saw at the beginning, that search application with the news articles. From there, we're going to pass the search query to this WebSearch API and their news search endpoint, which will return a list of news articles. We're going to parse that and then feed the body of a chosen news article to this API, the AYLIEN API, which is a language processing or text processing API. And that's going to return the sentiment, the entities that the algorithm detects in the article, and an automatic summary. And they have several other endpoints in this API as well, but we'll just implement these three. And then that gets sent back to Bubble and displayed in that app that we saw. So it's a pretty straightforward architecture. It might even be a bit of a stretch to call it an architecture. It's just a couple of APIs talking to your Bubble app, but that's good. So we'll start out with an even simpler version. We're just going to build a little text box in Bubble where a user can paste some content, and we'll send that over to this AYLIEN API. And then we'll add the news fetching in the middle after that's ready to go. So if we come back to Bubble, here is a blank page. So this is a brand new Bubble application that we haven't done anything with yet. So the first thing to do would be to install the API connector, just like we did in the last tutorial. So you come to your plugins tab, click add plugins. This usually takes a few seconds to load, and type API. And usually the first or second result is the API connector from Bubble. Click install, and now you're ready to start implementing APIs in your Bubble applications. So we know that we want the user to be able to enter some text. So the first thing we'll do is just stick a multi-line input here, so that a user can enter some text. And we're going to want a button to send that text off to the API. So we'll just leave that there for now. And we'll go over and look at how to find APIs that you might want to use. So one of the most useful features of Bubble, in my opinion, is their API connector, which we just installed, because this allows you to talk to all kinds of other services on the web. There are thousands of publicly available APIs, everything from Twitter and Reddit and Archive, like I mentioned earlier, to things like text analysis, image processing, financial data, geographic data, all kinds of things. So there are different ways to find these APIs. You can do a search in your favorite search engine, or my favorite way to do it is to use RapidAPI. This is a marketplace for different APIs. It's a fantastic service. It allows you to sign up and get a single API key and then connect to a whole bunch of different APIs. So like I said, there's data, sports, finance, travel. You can use one account to connect to a whole bunch of different APIs, which makes it really fast to try different APIs in the same category or different categories. It's just a fantastic service. So we're going to use this to connect two different APIs, the AYLIEN API and the USearch API, to our application. I'm already signed in. If you don't have an account with RapidAPI, you can just go to rapidapi.com and sign up. It just requires an email address. Doesn't take very long. And then you want to search for the APIs that you want to use. So we know that we want to build a text processing application. So you could type text processing or NLP or whatever you like in here. You can also search through categories. And down here, they have a bit of a showcase. So we know that we want to do text analysis. So we could click on this. And that brings up this page here, top text analysis APIs. This AYLIEN API is the one that we're going to use, but you can try different ones and see what suits your purposes best. When you're looking through the API listings, they have some data about each API in these cards. This is popularity and latency for the calls and service level. Basically, you want this to be high, this to be low, and this to be high. If this is high, it means a lot of people are using it, which probably means that it's pretty good. If this is low, that means it's returning results fast, although it depends on what you're doing. Some APIs are going to take long because they're returning a lot of data, and that's fine. And then service level is an indication of how active the API developers are. So if people have issues, they're responding to them. And you can see all these here have very high service levels and popularity, not surprisingly, because this is their showcase. But anyway, once you find one that you want to use, you can click on this, click on the card, and it should bring up the APIs page. And this is the AYLIEN APIs page. And you can see those same three metrics here, a little description of it, and then here are the details of how to plug it into your application. So these three columns on the left here are the API endpoints. So these are the things that you can, these are the addresses that you can hit and basically the functions that the API exposes to you. So for example, we're going to use this sentiment analysis endpoint, which here's the URL for it. We're going to plug that into API connector in just a minute. We're also going to use the entity extraction and the summarization endpoints. So over here is what the API can do for you. In the middle are the details about how to set it up. So you can see there's your API key and your API host, and then you've got some parameters down here. And we'll go through this in detail as we set up these APIs. And then over on the right, they have code snippets that you can use to implement these APIs in software. So if you're writing code, so for example, if you're writing a Python application and you want to use the requests module to do that, here's the code that you would use to do that. So we're not going to be using the code snippets, but this write pane makes it easier to copy and paste text. Some of these fields you can't click on. For example, this API host, you can't copy and paste, so it's easier to just get it from here. But yeah, all the information you need is in there. So that's it. I'll say one thing before we start implementing this, which will only take a minute. I mentioned already one of the great features of RapidAPI is that you can find a whole bunch of different APIs in one place. Another great feature of it is that their layout for all the different APIs is standardized. So once you learn what how these are laid out, you can go to the page for another API and parse it, understand it really quickly, which makes it easier to experiment with new APIs. So for example, this is the WebSearch API that we're going to use. And you can see it's laid out identically with your metrics up here and your description and your three columns. So once you know that you need your RapidAPI key and your RapidAPI host as part of your API integration with Bubble, you know exactly where to find it. So those are, I think, two of the best features of RapidAPI. So back to text analysis. Where were we here? Actually, I'll say one more thing about this particular API before we move on to implementing it. Here's the AYLIEN website. And so another way that you can get access to lots of different APIs is by going directly through the API provider. So you could come here to AYLIEN and start a free trial, and you'll get an API key and so forth. It's I find it a lot easier to manage by just having an API marketplace, or sorry, a RapidAPI account, and you end up with the same functionality. In this particular case, when you try to sign up through AYLIEN, it actually just redirects you to RapidAPI, I believe, but I'm not certain about that. That is the case for this WebSearch API, which I've closed the site for. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, it's just easier to manage through RapidAPI. So, okay, so here we are back in the AYLIEN API page, and the first thing you might want to do is click Test Endpoint, and that will just send off a call to whichever API endpoint you've selected over here. We've got summarization selected, and you see here's the text, and then it returns these, by default, 5 sentences summarizing the content in this paragraph. And then we want to grab this data, so that the API key, the API host, and so forth, and these parameters, and port them over to our Bubble API connector. So if we come back to Bubble, and we go to our Plugins tab, click API connector, we have this page here. We want to click Add another API, and we'll call this AYLIEN. And we know that we're going to have to add these two header parameters, so our RapidAPI key and our RapidAPI host. So if we go here, we can say add a shared header, and we'll copy the keys, the name of the parameter, and then we'll paste the values in. So first we'll grab, so yeah, we're in the results tab here because we click test endpoint, but you want to be in code snippets if you're going to copy this, these headers here. So we can see RapidAPI key, we'll bring this over here, paste it in here. And we know the other one is host, so I'll just change it. You could, alternatively, you could copy it here and paste it. And then we need these values. So we'll take this, our RapidAPI key, we'll paste it in there, and then we'll come back and we'll get the RapidAPI host, and we'll paste it in there. So now we have our headers. And note that these are shared headers for all calls. So we're going to set up 3 different endpoints from this API, which is we'll do down here, but they're all going to share the same API key and the same API host. So you only have to do this part of the copying and pasting for these headers. You just have to do that once for each API and not for each endpoint that you want to implement. Okay, so now we've got the header set. The next thing to do is to add an API call. So the first call we'll implement is the summarization endpoint. So we'll call this summarization, and it makes it easier to keep things straight. I find to just use the same naming convention that they use. So if we click on summarization, we can see here the URL that we need, and they call it summarize. The last part of the URL is the name of the endpoint. That's a standard convention. That's what you'll almost always see. So we want to copy this because we know we're going to need to paste it in. But I'm going to use summarize for the name of the call. So I called it summarization, but we'll call it summarize. And then here is where you want to paste that URL that we just copied. So summarize. It tells you here that it's a get. There's one post endpoint here, but the rest of them are get. So we're going to leave that as default as get. And we're going to change this to action, which I'll explain why in a minute. We don't have any headers for this specific endpoint, so we can leave this alone. We can leave this alone. And then we need to add some parameters. So here we've got these optional parameters. So this is the content that you're going to feed to the API. So for example, the text of what we're actually going to summarize is this parameter. You also have to feed it a title if you're pasting a block of text. Alternatively, you can send it a URL. So it'll go and scrape a web page, and you don't have to feed it a title and a text. You just feed it a URL, but we're going to do this by feeding it the title and the text. We also need the mode because we're going to, actually, sorry, for this endpoint, we don't need the mode, but for a later one, we will. And you can change the number of sentences it returns. By default, it's 5, which we saw over here in the results tab. There's starting at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 5 sentences that the API that the API thinks are most indicative of the meaning of this block of text. We'll play with this in a minute here. Okay, so the first thing to do is grab title and text and put those over here. So we know we need a title parameter. We need a text parameter. We also wanted sentences number. So we'll copy this, paste this in here. And that's good enough for now. Now note that these are optional parameters. This means that you don't have to send any of these through for the call to work. But there's also an optional field here in bubble. This is a little bit different. This means it's optional to bubble, as far as I understand, and optional to the API is a distinct concept. So you might tell your application that a parameter is not optional if you need it, even if the API thinks it's optional. That might be a little bit confusing, hopefully not, but yeah. And then this other checkbox, private here, this determines whether the value that goes in here is hard-coded or dynamic. So we know that our text is going to be the text of a news article that we select, and so that's going to have to be dynamic. And same thing with the title here. And the sentences number, we could make it private or not. If we want to fix it at 5, we could leave it as 5, or we could make it so that on each call we specify how many sentences we want to return. If your application, if you want to give that option to the user, for example, but we'll just say 5 and leave it as default. Okay, so now we've got everything wired up. We've got our API defined with our headers. We've got our API endpoint summarize the URL and the parameters here. We should now be able to paste some title text in here and some body text in here and click initialize and get a sample response back. So let's try that. Let's take their sample text and see if we get their sample response. So here's the text. This is the result actually. So let's, yeah, actually the results returns the text, the original text that you fed it. So it doesn't really matter where you grab it, I guess. Take this and paste it in here. And then we'll add the value of the title field as well. Doesn't seem to be here. Oh, I'm sorry. They have it as a dictionary. So if to parse this, you see there's these curly braces here at the start and the end, and there are 2 fields inside, the title and the text. My mistake. So we'll take the title here and put that there, and then we'll take the text of the body, which is here. Okay, and plug that in there. Now we should be able to initialize the call and get a response. So we get the text back, which is what we pasted in, and then the sentences as a list. And you see Batman has always been my favorite superhero, blah, blah, blah. And if we look over at our results response, Batman has always been my favorite superhero. So we know Bubble is now talking to this API. That's good. So we can now use this in our application to process text that the user enters. So the way that we would do that is, first thing we want to do is change this from data to action. If it's set to data by default, you can make your pages load with data from this API automatically. We want to trigger the API with a button, and so we'll set it to use as an action so that we can set up a workflow that triggers this API. So the way we do that is we say when this button is clicked, so let's call this analyze. When this button is clicked, we want to send whatever's in this multi-line input to the AYLIEN API and return the results. So we need a place to display the results actually. So let's make another text element below it, and we'll say here sentiment that's returned, or sorry, we had summary first, summary, and then we will put some dynamic data in here, which is what's returned from this API. So the way we do that is we'll put a custom state on this text element, and we will call it summary, let's say, and it's a text item. And then we're going to say that this box should display whatever is in this default value, or pardon me, whatever's in this custom state. And by default, we'll just say default. And then when we trigger the API with this button, this text will be sent off and the results will be returned and stuck into this state here. So the way we do that is we say insert dynamic data, and we say we want the state from this item, which is text summary, and it's summary here. So when we first load this, it should say default, and then after we click the button, it should send this off and change this. So to do that, we go to the workflow. We say when this button is clicked, then we want to call our API, which is under the plugins tab, AYLIEN summarize endpoint. By default, it pastes it populates this text field with, as well as the title field, with what we use to initialize. But we don't want to do that. We want to make this dynamic. So we'll say that the text field is whatever's in multi-line inputs value. And then the title will say this is a sample title, more to come, just so we have something in there. And let's see if we preview our app now, if this works. It should work. We're just going to copy that same text, the Batman text, for now to see if it works. So we'll come back here to grab that. Copy this. And then in here, we'll paste it. And you can see the text here. The summary right now says default. We click Analyze. It should send this off and return a response. Oh, I missed a step here. In the workflow, after we click the summary, we need to actually do something with the returned value. So what we'll do is we'll say set state of an element. You can go element action set state, or you can type set state of an element here. And then we choose our text element that we added the custom state to, which right now is called text A. Let's make that a little bit more clear by changing this to text summary, just for later. It'll be more clear. So we'll say set the state. Let's do that again. Set state of an element. The element that we want is text summary, and the custom state is summary. And the value is going to be what's returned from step 1. So we say result of step 1, the sentences. And this is going to go red because what's returned is a list of sentences. And what we have in here is just a single sentence. So we can change this to be a list. So you go back into your element, click element inspector, and then we just want to click list here. And now this should be, yeah, that's blue now. So it's going to return those 5 sentences and hopefully place it in this box here. Let's try that again. Can I paste? Yep. We click analyze and let's see. There we go. There's the summary. Batman has always been my favorite superhero, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we've got the AYLIEN summary API endpoint wired up. Now let's get the sentiment analysis and the entity extraction endpoints wired up as well. And we'll just put those below here, and then we'll move over to implementing the news analytics, fetching the news stories. So now that we've got the plugin configured, or pardon me, the API configured here, it's quite easy to add other endpoints. So what we can do is collapse away this summarize endpoint, and we just need to fill in this text for the remaining 2 calls. So we'll just add them here at the same time. We'll call this first one sentiment, and we'll call this one entities. I think these are the terms they use. So we come back to RapidAPI, which is here, and we want to get sentiment analysis, and the URL for that is sentiment. So we can copy this and paste it in here. So that's the sentiment API. We're going to use this as an action as well. We'll fill out the parameters in a second. And then the entities endpoint is down here, entity extraction. And it's entities. We copy it here and paste it over here. Use as action. Okay, so now we got that wired up. Now we want to set up our parameters. So we'll go back to sentiment. So this hopping around of different endpoints might be confusing. I find it easier to sort of do it in batches this way, but your mileage may vary. Okay, so the optional parameters for this endpoint are text, URL, and mode. We're just going to use text. We're not going to do the URL approach. And here we need mode because we're not using tweets, we're using documents. So if you were using, say, the Twitter API and then feeding the text to this, you probably want tweet, which appears to be the default, but we're going to set it to document. You can check out the AYLIEN API documentation for more details, which you can usually find if you go to About. Sometimes they have tutorials attached to their API pages, which can be helpful. But here you can see for detailed documentation and support, visit this. But for our purposes, we're just going to set it to document. A lot of the parameters are self-explanatory, and so you often don't have to worry about it. One thing to note about RapidAPI is when you click on one of these tabs and then come back to your endpoints, it selects the top endpoint. So if we had selected sentiment analysis, for example, it might confuse you. It's confused me several times. So anyway, let's do sentiment analysis. So we need the text and the mode parameters. So we'll say text and mode. Mode we know we want to be document, and we will leave that checked private because we're not going to change that. And text will be unchecked because this will be dynamic. And to initialize it, we can take their sample text again. So they have this. Just copy this, paste it in here, and that should be it. And you can see we get the results of the endpoint. So we got polarity, which is positive, negative, neutral. Subjectivity is whether there's the presence of things like I think, I feel, my opinion, language like that in the text. Here's the text that we fed it. And then confidence for polarity and subjectivity. What we want is this polarity rating. So we'll click save, and we'll come back to our interface, and we'll copy this element, maybe shrink these a bit so they can fit here a bit more easily. And then this will say sentiment, polarity. And instead of text summary copy summary, we're going to change the name of this text element to sentiment. And we could go in here and say, change this to polarity. And then we could have another one. Again, we could do the same thing with a third custom state on a third text element. But I prefer to keep sort of logically connected custom states in one place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move those custom states over to this, or maybe I'll just put them on the page, actually. So here, let's do this. Let's go into this, and we'll get rid of this summary text custom state. And so that's going to make this fail out because that custom state no longer exists. Same thing with this. We'll get rid of this one. And then we'll get rid of this one. And then I'm going to just move those to be custom states for the page. So the way you do that is you click on the page, click here, custom state, add a new custom state. So we want summary, and that will be text as a list. And then we want another one, which is polarity. Polarity. That will be text. It's not a list. It's a single text value. And then entities, which I believe is a list. And if not, we can fix that. So text and list. So now we have our three custom states defined on the page. And so now these three text elements, we want to reference the page defined custom states. So we go in here and we say, we want the summary to be, what's the name of our page here? Index. Let's call it NLP page. By default, you start a new application in Bubble. You get an index page. You always have to have an index page. So actually, I might not be able to do this. I'm not sure. You need a page to function as your index, but I don't know if it needs to be called index. What happens here? Yeah, you can't change its name. So forget that. It doesn't matter. We'll just refer to it as index. So pardon that digression. We'll go to index, and we want the summary custom state from the page. And we'll go here, and we want indexes polarity. So maybe we should change that to polarity to be more clear. And then this will be entities, and we will insert indexes entities. Okay, so now we should be able to do what we did earlier and trigger the summary endpoint, but we haven't yet wired up the workflow to populate these two fields, but let's just make sure everything is still working before we do that. So we'll come up here and grab that text from the summarize endpoint, paste it back in here, and click analyze and see if this works. Let's see, this is unknown by default. This is not working. Okay, so we didn't change our workflow appropriately. So the element that we want to change now is, see, we call the endpoint, we want to change the custom state of indexes summary. And while we're in here, let's change the other custom states as well. So we'll set the state, pardon me, we can do that here in this dialog. So we'll say the custom state. We've got the element index. We can do all three states in one dialog, which is handy. We'll say entities. We haven't wired up that endpoint yet, so let's leave that alone, actually. We'll set polarity to the result of a second call. So let's do that. Let's do actually, there's two different ways we could do this. We could call the summarize endpoint and then set the custom state for index summary. We could do those two things together and then duplicate these two steps so that we call another endpoint and set a custom state, and then call another endpoint and set the custom state for the third thing. Or we could call all three endpoints and then set the custom state of index with those three fields all at once. And I think that's probably a bit cleaner. So let's do that. So we'll call the summarize endpoint. We'll call the sentiment endpoint, and the text that we will feed over will be the same text. So it will be the multi-line inputs value. And let's wire up the third API before we test this now, or the third endpoint rather. So we've got sentiment done and entities. Okay, so we come back to here. Our entity extraction is here. And the parameters that we need, these are all defined already. We just need either URL or text. So just a single parameter for this one. We'll copy this text for initialization. First, we want to grab the URL. Oh, sorry, we already plugged that in. My mistake. We just need the parameter. So text. Pardon me there. So we add a text parameter. Paste it in here, click initialize, and that should be it. Yep. So we get our results, our entities. So note here that we have date, location, keyword, and person. So with this endpoint, you can get dates like August 4th, 1961. You can get locations, United States. We're going to use the person list. So the list of persons returned, as we saw in the intro. So yeah. Okay, so now that's working as well. It's set to be used as an action. So now we will call that as well. We'll say AYLIEN entities. So now we're calling our three endpoints, summarize, sentiment, and entities. And now we're going to set the value of the index custom states to those three, the returned values from those three calls. So index, custom state, we can just do these in order. So entities will be the result of step 3. And we want entities person. And then polarity will be the result of step 2, sentiment. Yeah, it may have been cleaner to call that sentiment, so it's not changing, but it's okay. Because now we select polarity. It's a little bit confusing if you've not done sentiment analysis before, but it's not too bad, hopefully. Okay, and then we'll set summary to the result of step 1. And the sentences. Okay, so now we're calling the three endpoints, and then we're setting all these three values to the results of those calls. So now if we preview it, let's see, we'll go back to the summarization endpoint and get this text and paste that into our multi-line input here and see what happens when we click analyze. Okay, so we get a summary, we get a sentiment with polarity, and we get Barack Obama as an entity. Now, Barack Obama is not in this. We forgot to change the value that we were sending over in that call. So we'll go back to here, and there's no parameter defined in here. So yeah, if you look at the sentiment call, for example, there's a param text, and summarize has param title and text. But if you click on entities, you can see there's nothing here, which means that we just forgot to define the parameter. Or actually what we did is not uncheck the private box right here. So it's just going to send this text over to this endpoint. It's hard-coded to be this. So we uncheck this and reinitialize it. You get the same results. And then we come back into our workflow, and here, here you can see it's populated with that text. We want to take that out and send the text of the multi-line input as with the other two calls. Okay, so we'll test this again, and now all three should be working, hopefully. Paste it in, we get a summary, we get a sentiment, which is positive, and then we get these entities. So James Gordon, Harvey Dent, Joker, Gotham, Batman, etc. So that's good. So our three AYLIEN endpoints are all returning correctly, so that's good. The next thing to do to get those news articles is to implement another API from USearch, and then implement their news search endpoint in that API. So we'll do that here in just a second. Okay, so now that we have the text processing backend implemented, we're going to do two things. We're going to implement the USearch API, and we're going to build the front end, the interface, to allow the user to enter a search query and display the results. So we're going to recreate this. So we're going to need a search box and a button to trigger a search. And then we're going to use something that looks like this. You could design this kind of interface in lots of different ways, but we're going to have a list returned of news articles. We're going to be able to display the full text of the article in here. So for example, if you click this, you get the full article, and then we're going to have an analytics tab that returns the results of calling the AYLIEN API. So this is the same stuff that we just implemented, with this as the text body being sent over to the API, which comes from an article that is returned. So this USearch API we're going to implement in a minute, and its news search endpoint allows us to return a news article with a title, a URL, an image, and a body, and several other things. So we'll display some stuff here in the list, and then we'll pass this to the second tab and then analyze it. So we're going to build this with Bubble's tab element template. So this is a nice feature that it's a pre-built element that looks like this, and we're just going to modify it a little bit to make it a bit bigger. But yeah, so what we're going to do is get rid of these three things for now. We're going to just pull them down here so that they're out of the way, and we're going to add this tab element here. And by default, it's not very big, so we're going to stretch it out. So first we'll design the interface, which might take a couple of minutes, and then we'll do the implementation of the USearch API. So we want tab 1. Oh, sorry. So what we want to do basically is stretch out each of these containers a bit. They're all sort of layered on top of each other, so you can build something like this manually, of course, but having this pre-built template just makes it a little bit easier. The primary thing that's nice about this, I think, is just you've got these buttons that look like tabs, and they trigger a custom state to change so that this internal box knows that which tab you're on, and so we can use that to figure out what to display to the user. So we'll it's tricky if you've never worked with sort of hidden elements before in Bubble. You've got a bunch of these stacked on top of each other, and you can't see them right now. So you open your elements tree. You want to uncheck this only show hideable, and we're going to have to go through each one individually and do that same stretching. Yeah, so you expand these, and then you've got this group tab copy. I'm not sure why it's called copy. I'm guessing we had one earlier, and it's because of that, but let's get rid of this. And you can see here you've got your buttons, and then you've got the body of this box here. You can expand this further, and you've got tab 1 content, tab 2, and tab 3. So we just stretched out the text content for tab 1. So we're going to change this, and we're going to say the list will go here. We're going to change this text element to be a repeating group in a minute to display that list. And then we can say here news articles. And then we go to tab 2, expand that, and stretch this out. Same deal. And in here is where we're going to put the full text of the article. So full text of article. And we're going to change this to be a dynamic content with a custom state. But we'll wait till we're ready to do that. And then here we'll say full text of article. Got a typo there. And then same thing for tab 3. So we'll expand that. And in tab 3 is where we're going to put our analytics. And so we'll be able to just, once we're ready, we'll just pull these text boxes back into this area here. Just use this as a placeholder for now. So call this analytics. Sorry about that. We'll preview, make sure this is all working correctly. So we've got tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, and you can see the content changes, news articles, full text of article, and analytics. Okay, so that's the interface in a nutshell. So we'll go back to tab 1, so group 1. We're going to call this group tab 1 article list, and call this one group tab 2 full text. So you don't need to change these names. I just find it makes it easier to keep track of what's where as you're building things out. Once you've got a lot of groups and elements and things, it becomes hard to track what's what. Okay, so we're going to delete this text box here, this text content tab 1. We don't need this. We're going to replace this with a repeating group. So first we delete this, and then click repeating group. Ignore that replaced by another type mistake there. And we're going to put the articles in this repeating group. So we don't yet have the data type defined for a news story, because what's going to happen is we're going to set up the USearch API, and the type of thing it returns, it creates a new data type. Anytime you set up a new API, the return type becomes a data type that you can reference, and you can populate repeating groups with that data type. We don't yet have it. So if we open up the dialog for the repeating group, it wants a type of content. You always have to have a type of content attached to a repeating group, but we don't have that data type defined yet. So what we're going to do is pop over to the API connector and implement the USearch API. And the first thing we'll do is just generate a list of news articles before we pass it over to these other tabs to do the other processing. So let's do that now. So let's first make a bit of room for a search bar so that we can trigger our USearch API in a minute with the content of this. We'll just leave it blank for now. So we go under our plugins and API connector. There's our AYLIEN API, and here we want USearch. So if we come back here, this WebSearch API. So USearch is this company or group that provides the API. Alternatively, you might want to call it WebSearch. That's the name of their API, so that's probably a bit more appropriate. This group has other APIs on RapidAPI, so yeah, let's call it WebSearch. And the endpoint that we want to implement is this news search API endpoint. And I don't know if it describes it in here yet. Get news articles relevant for a given query. So if we want to test this endpoint, you can see here this query parameter Q. By default, it's Taylor Swift. Let's say COVID-19 instead. And click test endpoint, and you'll see what we get back as an example. So it returns 10 stories. Here, page size, I think, is where that comes from. And each story has several fields. So an ID, a title, a URL, a body, and so forth. This body is what we're going to be analyzing, but we're also going to be passing this title. As I mentioned in the AYLIEN summarization API, they want a title and a body, so we're going to pass both of those. And then we've got an image down here, and we can grab this URL and display that. That gives us, I've closed the example, but the previous version of the app that we built. But you can see if we type it in here, we can return, usually there's an image attached to a news story through this API, and that's this. And so we're going to get these different fields. Okay, so here's our API. We need to add our headers, which is going to be, they're going to be the same as this, actually. This is not going to be the same. Obviously, this is not an AYLIEN API, but your RapidAPI key is going to be the same. And the names of these two parameters are the same. So this is that second benefit I was talking about earlier, where it becomes, once you know that these are what you need to plug into your APIs to access APIs through RapidAPI, it becomes really easy. So we can just do this, paste it down here. Now we need to get the host from the, from here. And that will be in code snippets, RapidAPI host. We'll grab this and plug that in right there. And then we want to see what else we need for parameters for our specific calls. So we know that we want the news search API, although I don't know what they call it. Yeah, news search. So the header parameters we've plugged in already, and the required, so with the AYLIEN API, a lot of the parameters were optional, like down here, but there are several required parameters that we need to pass to this API. And so we'll set up these first. So Q, page number, page size, and autocorrect. So we can say, where are we here? Add parameter. So we want 4 parameters. We want Q page size, is it page number, and autocorrect. Am I recalling those correctly? Page number, page size, and autocorrect. So yeah, yep. We know that the query we don't want to be hard-coded. We want that to be dynamic so that when the user types in a search query, I'll reload this page here to see the search box, but when the user enters a search query in this box here, we want that to be what's fed to this value. For now, we'll just say hard-coded as COVID-19. Page size, we'll say return 10 articles. I think the maximum is 50. Page size, maximum value is 50. So you could return up to 50 articles at a time. And then if you wanted more, you have to paginate. You have to go through the pages. So you could first return page 1 with 50 results and then page 2 and so forth if you looped through several calls. But we're just going to return 10 articles for demonstration. Page number 1, and then autocorrect will set to true. And this is not going to change, so we can leave that private. This is not going to change, and this is not going to change, so we'll just leave those all as private. We want to trigger this as a workflow action, and we need the URL, which is right here. Paste this over here. So there we go. And there are some optional parameters as well. I don't recall if we need any of these. Safe search. Oh yeah, we need this with thumbnails, as we mentioned with the image. From publish date to, we don't need those. We don't need safe search. So we'll set this to true in here. Pardon me, with thumbnails. So we type that in here, making typos. And the value here will be true. And that will be static as well. So I think that's enough to initialize it. If we click initialize, do we get a result? It appears we do not. Oh, here we go. Just takes a little while to return. So we've got our value list, which is where the articles are stored. So we've got the latest vaccinated prisoners in Alaska can have visitors, and so on and so forth. This description is often a summary. So if you were so inclined, you could auto-generate a summary and then compare it to this description and see how well the algorithm does at generating a summary automatically. We're not going to do that, but you can see here is the image URL, and that's how we're going to grab the thumbnail. Yeah, and then our title and our body. So we'll save that. Now that's implemented. So if we go back here, I was saying we needed a data source for this repeating group. Now that we've implemented that API, we should be able to select a new search data type to be the data type to populate this repeating group. So the type of content we want is now a new search, and the data source is going to be the result of a call that we stick into a custom state attached to the page. So it might make more sense to put the state here on this group tab or somewhere else, but we're going to just put it here on the index page with our other element, with our other custom states, just to keep it all together. So we'll call it search result. And so we want actually the values list. So what we're going to do is we're going to say new search value. So that was that list that we looked at with the substructure of the title and the ID and all that stuff. And we're going to say it's a list. And we're going to set this index search result after we call the API. So the way we would do that, first of all here, so we're going to attach that data source. We're going to reference that, what we just defined there. Although it doesn't seem to be here. What's going on here? So, okay, sorry about that, a bit of a mix-up. We actually want the data type to, reloading the page, my mistake here. We want the data type for the repeating group to be a new search value, not a new search. You could do it in other ways as well. You could probably set it to be a new search and instead of a new search value, but in any case, this is what we want, and we want it to be indexes search result. And so you can see that this is a list of new search values, so that's good. So now we need to actually get a list of these. So we'll come up here into our search box and create a workflow action to say that when the search value when the box in the search value, when the value in the search box changes, we want to call our new search API with whatever's in that search box. And so we'll say, call this API, and Q, the parameter, will be whatever is in the search box. Okay, so now we want to set the index's search result custom state to the result coming back from this API. So we do that by going into element action set state and index, and custom state we want to set as search result, and the value will be the return from this. So result of step 1 and its value. So this is a list of new search values, and that's what we want to put in our repeating group, because we have new search value as the type of content. So I think that's all we need to do to trigger a search and populate this, this repeating group with that content. But we won't be able to see anything in here unless we have some elements inside the cells of the repeating group. So just for the sake of demonstration, to get things started, let's say that we want the current cell's new search's value. So each cell is a new search value. We want its title. And now if it works as intended, we should see the titles populate without the rest of it, but we can do that after we know that it's working. Okay, so load the page, and let's type COVID-19 again, and we can see the API is triggering. And does anything come back? There we go. So now we have these titles. So that means that the API is talking to us. So that's good. So now the next thing we want to do is add a button to this repeating group cell, to each cell, that says take the article in each cell, or whichever cell is selected, take the body of the article and set it to another custom state that we can then reference to analyze. Okay, so the way that we do that we will be able to view the full text of the article, is we'll put an icon in the cell here and have clicking on that trigger setting a custom state. So we'll put this here, let's shrink this a bit, and change it. We'll use the expand icon here. Okay, and we'll say that when this is clicked on, to set the content of the second tab, the body of the tab, to be the body of this news article. So what we'll do is first we need a custom state to be able to put the body into, and then we need to set the tab content. So let's expand this again. So group 2 is where we're going to display the full text of the article. So this here, this text object, we want this to be referencing some custom states. So let's leave this for a second. Let's go back to index, put another custom state here. Again, you might put this custom state elsewhere, but let's keep it all together for now. And we'll say, so there's two ways we could do this. We could set the text body into a custom state, or we could set the, we could create a custom state to hold the selected article, and then we would be able to reference all the different content within that object. So let's do that instead. So let's say selected article, and then we'll reference the selected article's body for the text. And so the type here is a new search value, and we'll click create. And so then we'll say, when this, looks like we moved that somewhere it probably shouldn't be. There we go. So we'll say that this will display that. It'll say, where are we here? Indexes, selected articles, body. And this is a text. And so that's what we want to go in there. And now we just need to say that when we click on that icon in tab 1, that we trigger a workflow action to set that custom state of selected article to be the article of this cell. So that looks like this. We say when the icon is clicked, we want to set the state of indexes selected article to be the current cell's new search value. So this evaluates to a new search item, and it will set it to that custom state and hopefully display it in that second tab. So that should work, hopefully. Let's see. Okay, we'll type COVID-19 again and get our articles back. Okay, and if we click here, okay, so it might be displaying, but it doesn't automatically take us over yet. We could set a workflow action to change our tab to that as well. But so here's the article, so that's good. So it is working. It's setting the custom state correctly. And now we have this body text. And so now we're going to add another button here, which is just going to feed this text to the API. And we'll grab these text elements and put them in tab 3, and we should be done. Let's go back to the editor. Okay, so we'll hide we'll hide tab group 1, because we don't need that right now. It's getting a bit cluttered here. So here's the full text. We'll add a button up here at the top, and we'll say analyze. And we'll trigger a workflow. Actually, you know what? We can just take this analyze button because it's doing the same thing already. And we'll put that in here. That'll work nicely. So in this workflow, we're calling the 3 APIs, and then we're setting the index. Okay, so we're already setting all the appropriate values, so that's good. And we may be able to just grab these text elements and copy them into drag them into here, and that might work. This is not the right tab, however, so let's undo that. Let's hide tab group 2 as well and show tab group 3 so that when we drag it, perhaps it'll just work as we wish. You can hold down Control when you click things to move them all together. And now we've got, okay, now they're in the Analytics tab. So let's see if this works. That may be all we needed to do to get the analytics displaying. And if so, then we are done. Okay, so we'll type in here. Okay, we'll pick this article and take a look at it. Annual Naples tradition, so on and so forth. And if we click Analyze, does this populate? It does populate, but with not the correct data. So what's going on here? That's interesting. So it's populating. I see what's happening. It's just populating with the default data. So let's go back to our workflow here. And it's taking the multi-line input value. That's not what we want, right? We want the content from the selected article's body text. So we need to reference that. That's the step I missed. So we'll say the text that we want to send over is the index's selected article body. And the title that we want is index's selected text, or selected article rather, title. And then we'll do the same thing over here. Get rid of this and say index's selected article body. And something you can do in Bubble is if you click in an expression, you right click and you can say copy expression. And we're just going to paste that same thing in here because we're referencing the same thing, the index's body, or sorry, the selected article's body. And then the results should all be correct. And so now let's try that again and see if that works. Let's try a different search query this time. Let's try DuckDuckGo, which is my search engine of choice. I recommend it if you don't use it. But I won't say more than that here. Your mileage may vary. Okay, so we got this. Click Analyze, and let's see. The Great Dock Canoe Race, sentiment polarity is positive, and the entity is Matt Flores Canoe Race, and so on and so forth. So that's working. Okay, so now we've got our news article. We could do a different one. Let's say U.S. will boost do not travel advisories. Okay, and yeah, and it should work again. One thing I'm going to do just before we finish here is under the workflow. I think it's nicer. It's a sort of UX UI consideration that when you click this, it takes you to tab 2 automatically. And then when you click this, it should take you to tab 3 automatically. And the way you would do that, if you noticed in the workflow, we've got these orange icons now. These are defined when we imported this this tab element template. That's where they come from. And what they're doing is setting the current tab state. So the group tab element that we imported has a custom state on it called current tab, which is a number. And so you've got 1, 2, 3. So you click tab 1, it sets it to tab 1. You click tab 2, it sets it to tab 2, and so forth. So basically what we want to do is we want to say, we want to go to tab 2. So we'll copy this workflow action. We want to go to tab 2 when we click the expand icon. So we can paste that in there. And then whenever we choose a selected article, it should take us to tab 2. And then when we click analyze, we want it to take us to tab 3. So we'll copy this and paste that at the end of this workflow. And now we should be able to see moving through the interface a little bit easier, a little bit more easily. So we get some articles back. So United loses lots of money. And you can see, yeah, we pick an article and it takes us to tab 2, and then we click analyze and it should take us to tab 3 after the analysis is done, and it does. So one quick note to finish here is if you were building something like this, you do some styling and you want to make it look a bit nicer. So you could do, for example, take an image, just shrink this down to be a thumbnail size, stick it in the cell here, pardon me, and set the content of it to be the parent cell's image URL, as we saw before. We could say current cell's new search value image URL, and that'll show a thumbnail. And we could say take the title here and style it to be maybe H2, and then maybe add an element down here with the URL. So we'll say, oh, pardon me, can I get that in there? We'll do this and make this body copy small, and we'll set the content to be current cell's new search value URL. And you click recognize links and emails and it'll automatically hyperlink URLs, which is quite handy. And so now if we preview this, it should look more like what we showed at the beginning. So we'll type, say, COVID-19 again, and hopefully see a slightly nicer representation of the data coming back from the API, although this would need some more work. So you can see the thumbnail, here's the title, and now here's the URL. And so the user could click it and it will take you to the external site where the news story came from. So yeah, that's it. So this concludes our tutorial on adding NLP capabilities to your Bubble apps. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Be happy to discuss this further. Thanks a lot for watching.